Hey guys, Negative9 here. How is it going, everybody? Welcome to another video. We finally got our first look at Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons and a lot of the features that will be coming in the expansion between siege turtles, fishing, and skiffs, and a lot of other cool stuff that they mentioned. There's a lot of stuff to talk about going forward as we approach February 2022, which they did confirm will be the release of the expansion. But one of the most interesting things that they released about the new expansion actually appeared later after the stream on their website, when they started taking pre-orders, and it's the fact that they released all 9 of the Elite Specialization icons on their pre-order website. We obviously don't have a lot of information about these new Elite specs yet, besides the Mesmer Elite Specialization that we got to preview during the live stream, and then they also gave a quick teaser of the Necro Elite spec later on in the live stream as well. But the fact that they've uploaded these to their website kind of gives us the opportunity to now do some speculation and some theory crafting on what exactly we think each of these icons could represent. One of the interesting things that they mentioned about the Elite specs in their live stream was that each of them was heavily inspired by the Canthan setting, and so we can kind of expect each of them to be themed accordingly alongside maybe the story or a particular faction. A couple days ago, they also released a really interesting blog post talking about just the extreme detail they were going into while designing the new Canthan language for this expansion. This then sparked a whole lot of speculation in the community that because they're going into such detail crafting this new Canthan language, that some of the words and symbols that they're designing may actually be used in some of the Elite Specializations themselves. For example, if we get a new profession that gets something like shouts, perhaps the shouts will actually be spoken in this new Canthan language instead of Crichton or English that we hear in-game. That's just something to keep in mind as we continue to speculate about these Elite Specializations. So today I wanted to go through each of these icons and try to decipher them basically as objectively and as fairly as possible to see if we can kind of pinpoint which one matches up with which profession. And so it makes a lot of sense to start off with the icon that we know the most about. This one is fairly straightforward because this is the first Elite spec they've revealed to us, and given the repeated motif of the dagger and the skill icons of the Virtuoso, I'd be very surprised if this was not their Elite spec icon. It may have even been confirmed at some point during the stream if you pay close attention to the UI, I'm not sure. But the new weapon is obviously the dagger. One interesting thing they mentioned while talking about their vision for the Virtuoso and the new Elite Specializations was that they kind of wanted to break some of their previous rules about Elite specs. And they started this by removing the Mesmer clones in exchange for daggers with this Elite spec. And funnily enough, there really doesn't seem to be anything overly Canthan about this spec from what we saw on the live stream, but there could be some interesting lore that we don't quite know about just yet. Given the name, there could be some kind of background as a Canthan performer, but because we already know a lot about the Virtuoso overall, we're going to call it here and move on to some of the more unknown quantities. Moving on to the next icon, to me this immediately looks like the icon for some sort of Ranger Elite Specialization. And this icon's particularly interesting because it definitely has a real animalistic vibe about it, maybe suggesting that the spec revolves around pets a lot more. I know a lot of people in the community have speculated for a while about getting some sort of double pet specialization, kind of a Beastmaster type thing. So this icon could sort of support that idea, but I also think it's interesting that the art itself focuses on the face of an animal or the face of some sort of creature, because generally, I know barring a couple exceptions, these icons usually identify the character itself rather than like the pet or the minion. Bearing that in mind, I would love an Elite Specialization that somehow ties in shapeshifting as a profession mechanic for the Ranger. Personally, I do think there is a bit of scope for this if the spec dips into the lore of the Wardens. In Guild Wars 1, the Wardens were mysterious protectors of the Echo-Vowed Forest. It's been said that the Wardens might have once been human druids who, long ago, merged with the spirit of the forest they served to become an altogether different creature. Visually, the Wardens largely resembled the men they might have once been, but with long, curved horns adorning their heads. During the Jade Wind, the Wardens were nearly driven mad by the damage caused to the newly petrified forest, but in the end, this only increased their fanatical commitment to the protection of the Echo-Vowed. Perhaps 250 years on, we'll have the opportunity to learn more of their story, and maybe even learn to commune with the spirit of the forest for ourselves. With a Warden-inspired spec, I would love the Ranger to adopt the Necromancer Shroud mechanic, allowing the Ranger to transform into a Warden for a period of time, and gain access to a new set of skills as a form of shapeshifting. I also don't really see any reason why a Warden theme couldn't be paired with a Hammer or Beastmaster double pet Elite Specialization. Additionally, this icon also has a vague similarity to the crest of the Kurziks, with the blade-like elements on the animal's head. The Kurziks were one of the two factions that the player could join in Guild Wars 1, and the Kurziks in particular were prominent in the Echo-Vald Forest and were known for their great houses and Gothic architecture. This could also leave the Juggernaut as a possible option for the Ranger Elite spec. If you take a look at their models, their faces kind of look somewhat similar to the face in this icon. Juggernauts were created by the Kurziks by tying the soul of a human to one of the Forever Trees, resulting in a large plant construct. Just as a side note, these Juggernauts were also used to fight against the Luxon Siege Turtles, which will be coming in End of Dragons, so I wonder if there's going to be any sort of interaction there. I think the Juggernaut would largely function, at least mechanically, in a lot of the same ways as a Warden-themed spec, but just with a slightly different flavor, I guess. Both, I think, would work quite well, but I feel like the Juggernauts and the Echo-Vald in general could be a hugely interesting place for new Sylvari lore, but that's probably a story for another day and another video. Next up, we have what I think is another pretty straightforward icon. Straight away, I recognize the diamond shapes, which are prominent around the blades here, which are very reminiscent of the Thief's initiative symbols, which also feature in the Deadeye Elite spec icon. Conveniently, this also gives away the new weapon if this is indeed the Thief Elite Specialization icon, adding a main hand sword to the Thief's arsenal. And just as further confirmation, the Assassin icon from the original Guild Wars also featured crossed swords, so I think for the first time we could be getting a profession from Guild Wars 1 added as an elite spec in Guild Wars 2, at least in name. When we visited Cantha in the original game, the Assassin was an accepted feature of Canthan society, mostly functioning as contract killers, but kind of with a deeper purpose than you might expect. Much like how the Ranger must protect the balance of nature, the Assassin's mission is to protect the balance of society in Cantha. Most assassins answer to powerful employers such as nobles, guild leaders, or even the emperors themselves. In the original game, an assassin's chosen weapon was usually a dagger, but given that the thief already has double dagger available to them, it looks like that they're going to be getting sword instead. And this still actually fits really well within the lore of the assassins, given that the most notorious assassin in history, Shiro Tagachi, was a wielder not of dual daggers, but of dual swords. Mechanically, I would really love this elite spec to somehow give the thief some more utility and group content, which might come through some of the more magic-based skills and hexes which were available to the original assassin in Guild Wars 1. Most of the community has come to the consensus that this is the new Elementalist's elite spec icon. It just kind of looks Elementalist-y to a lot of people, but for me this wasn't really good enough proof, even though I do agree, so I tried to do a little bit of research, and in the process I dug up the Guild Wars 1 Elementalist icon, and it's actually a shockingly convincing match. The gem shape in the center of the spike or flame element in this icon also vaguely resembles the forehead gems you choose from in character creation, and I've seen a lot of comments from people convinced that the diamond shape could also be representing an arrowhead if it was coming kind of straight on at you. This is obviously fueled by a lot of the community speculation about the Elementalist getting some sort of bow with this new elite specialization, whether it be longbow or shortbow. And I don't deny that Elementalist could definitely use a new long-range weapon option, but if I had my own say in this, I would personally much rather a pistol to kind of fulfill that spellslinger archetype, but given that we know the Necromancer is probably getting pistol at this point, I think that's a little bit more unlikely. But even better, in a perfect world, I would just have the new elite specialization remove weapons altogether, and have the Elementalist cast spells using just their hands in a much more traditional style of spellcasting. No new weapon could be made up for by adding a 5th arcane attunement. So that's my little wish list for Elementalist, and they talked about breaking their previous elite specialization rules, but that one might be a step too far. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Besides the Virtuoso, which we of course already know, this next icon might have been one of the easiest to assign. Since its release, the Revenant has actually been really consistent visually from its core icon up until this new edition now. To me, this icon looks very much like the core Revenant icon kind of merged and meshed with the icon of the Ritualist, which is impressive because I kind of believe the original Revenant icon was already based on that Ritualist logo already. Revenants, of course, have a lot of thematic overlap with the original Ritualist, right down to the blindfold. It looks like the Ritualist as a whole might be coming back as a new elite specialization this time, though, which might explain why the very first End of Dragons teaser included a tiny little hidden Ritualist logo. The original Ritualist was a profession that had the ability to channel energies from the mists, as well as commune with spirits through binding rituals. Ritualists were also able to bend the will of these spirits to aid their allies or punish their foes. So this might mean that the Ritualist, as an elite specialization in Guild Wars 2, might give the Revenant the ability to summon spirit minions. I said earlier that the Assassin might be the first Guild Wars 1 profession added as an elite spec in Guild Wars 2, at least in the name. Well, it seems to me that if not in name and mechanics, this spec would surely bring back the spirit of the Ritualist profession. In terms of a new weapon, I don't really have many suggestions based on the mechanics themselves, but if we reference the icon again, it kind of looks like there are two vertical blades framing the sort of hybrid Ritualist icon in the center. This could be hinting at dual daggers, but again, that could be me stretching a little bit. I do think dual dagger could fit with the theme and some of the mechanics of the Ritualist though. Now, these next four icons are the absolute hardest for me to pin down. Until now, I think the professions have been, if not obvious, at least pretty easy to decipher after a couple of minutes. Of course, the mechanics I suggest for them and the weapons I suggest for them could be completely wide of the mark, but I'm pretty confident that they're each the profession I suggest they are. From here on out though, my confidence is much lower, and a convincing argument I think could be made for any one of these icons to represent any profession that we haven't yet talked about. Those being the Necromancer, Engineer, Warrior, and Guardian. This icon I've gone back and forth on several times over the past couple days, flip-flopping between Necromancer and Engineer, but I think I've finally settled on this icon representing the new elite specialization for the Necromancer, which we also conveniently have a little bit of a teaser for, which seems to be showing a pistol-wielding Asura. Originally, when I was convinced that this was for the Engineer, I was pretty sure that the spherical element represented, like a bomb, which of course is a pretty big part of the Engineer's profession. I also believed that the serpent eye shape in the center of that sphere, in the white, was a reference to the new Dragon Jade technology that will be a big part of the End of Dragons expansion, at least according to the reveal livestream. Like I said, I was pretty convinced by those clues, but then I took a little bit of a closer look at the Necromancer concept art and saw the little glowing orbs on the hip of the character, which I originally thought was some sort of lantern, but I can now see that they actually resemble spherical potion flasks, which I now believe is actually what's represented in the icon itself. I still don't really have an explanation for the serpent eye. That's the part that's really, twinging in the back of my mind, but I'm going to rely on the vibe of the icon here. I think visually, between the grunginess and the theme of the icon, it would fit really well alongside the Necromancer's other elite specialization iconography. So despite my explanation for Engineer being a little bit more complete and kind of having less holes in it, I'm actually going to rely on my instincts for this one, and I guess we'll see whether I'm right or wrong. I think a lot of the confusion with this icon comes from the likelihood that Necromancers will be getting access to the Engineer's Exlers in End of Dragons. That is, of course, if those little flasks in the concept art are actually the potions that I think they are, but I think it would be really cool to have some sort of Potion Master or Plague Doctor specialization, and it would be kind of interesting to see how it fits into the Canthan setting, and particularly groups like the Ministry of Purity. There's a whole lot more we can read into with this concept art for Necromancer. I think there's actually a lot more to talk about, and some things that we can maybe draw from the story by analyzing this concept art even closer, but I think that might warrant a video on its own, so maybe keep an eye out for that in the next couple of days. This icon was another really difficult one to place for me. It seems to pretty clearly depict a bullet, which instantly again makes it another candidate for the Necromancer Elite Specialization icon, but to me this visually and stylistically screams warrior. And I think when you compare it to the other Elite Specialization icons, it fits in really well. It also works if you suppose that warrior gets pistol or even double pistol, which I think could happen, although I think a lot more people in the community have been asking for a warrior elite specialization that offers a little bit more support, or some people have even straight up asked for a healing specialization. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, or whether or not maybe they can make that work with the pistol spec still, I guess we'll have to see, but there's really not a whole lot to go off on this one for me based on how I've assigned all the other icons, so I guess we'll move on to the next one. This next icon is another really interesting one, and another one that kind of was thrown around to a couple different professions, but then I finally decided, after giving the one with the serpent eye to the Necromancer, this became my new Engineer Elite Spec candidate. We know, thanks to the reveal stream, that Dragon Jade technology will play a really big role in the expansion, and so it would make a lot of sense if this technology was also seen in our professions. And of course, there's no better profession to harness this new technology than the engineer itself. In fact, on the End of Dragons website, we may even see our first glimpse of the Canthan engineer in a piece of concept art that shows a character with kind of a really impressive Dragon Jade prosthetic arm. This character is quite clearly an engineer thanks to the maybe too obvious wrenches in the belt, but we also see a similar technology being used in the Siege Turtle concept art with the large Dragon Jade powered cannons. And this kind of makes me think that we could be getting some sort of elite specialization themed around the Luxons. In Guild Wars 1, the Luxon Armada was the counterpart to the Kurziks and inhabited the Jade Sea at the time of the first game. The Luxons were a nomadic people who scoured the Jade Sea for precious resources using their large Leviathan vessels, which were moved across the Jade using manpower and magic. Personally, I'd be really interested to see how 250 years in the future, the Luxon Armada might have adopted this new Dragon Jade, which surely they do have if the concept art of their Siege Turtles is anything to go by. It would make a lot of sense in really a lot of different ways for the Luxons to use this new technology to their advantage in order to traverse the Jade Sea, and I think it would also make a lot of sense if the engineers as a profession are heavily involved in this process. I really like the idea of the Luxon Armada becoming a kind of strange, advanced Magitech faction. And this might sound like a really weird tangent I'm about to go on here, but I would really love if the Luxon Armada were similar in spirit to the Atlantean technology in Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire, which had a really interesting focus on the power of basically magical crystals that functioned as the main power source of this primordial civilization, which allowed them to develop new technology like these various magical flying machines. I think it would be a lot of fun to see the Luxons develop similarly in Guild Wars 2, and hopefully the engineer can reflect that a little bit. From a mechanics point of view, this icon either seems to be referencing, I don't know, maybe the prosthetic arm of the character itself, or as many have speculated in the past, a sort of Golemancer spec for the engineer. This could suggest another shroud-like mechanic that allows the engineer to transform into a mech or some sort of golem themselves, which could be a lot of fun for something like tanking. But again, because I'm not as confident in these icons actually representing the profession that I suggest they are, I don't want to go too far into the mechanics and disappoint myself when I'm proven wrong. Finally, we have this fascinating icon. This is another one that, again, I thought might represent Necromancer just on the pure fear factor, but I finally settled on this icon for the Guardian. And I had a tough time with the Guardian overall because none of the icons that we've seen here, none of them really scream Guardian to me besides maybe the previous one with the large shoulders and fists, again suggesting some sort of tanking spec. And for a while I thought this icon was a little bit too, like I said, a little bit too sinister for a profession like the Guardian. But you'll notice this mask is actually very reminiscent of the masks that samurai wore, who were of course warriors of discipline and virtue with a rigid code of conduct known as the Bushido, or Way of the Warrior. The spec could be somehow connected to the Ministry of Purity who, in-game, were dedicated to the eradication of the afflicted minions of Shiro Togachi. Maybe it is time for the Guardian to get kind of a darker theme for one of their elite specs. But as far as weapons go, this could really be another candidate for dual swords if we use some of the concept art that was created for the original Guild Wars for the Ministry of Purity as a reference. But again, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole when I could be talking about a completely different elite specialization icon, so I think this might be a good place to stop for now. The first elite specialization beta starts on August 17th, where we'll get to see the Virtuoso and the Necro Elite spec, so I would also think that along with those two, they said we'll be getting 3 to test. I would think that that also means we will see the Ellie Elite specialization before them, because of course those 2 others are light armor, and so it would make sense if they tossed in the 3rd light armor as well, but who knows, maybe that'll be different depending on, you know, how finished the elite specs are. So I hope you enjoyed some of this speculation. Hopefully we'll start to see how accurate our guesses were pretty soon. Be sure to leave your comments on your thoughts on what all of these icons could be. This is definitely a fun kind of little teaser for the elite specializations, and a really fun thing to get people talking, dialogue going about each of these elite specs, talking about what each person thinks each one is. So if I missed anything, be sure to let me know. Leave your predictions down below, and I will see you guys next time.